The 1212th day of the war. The U.S. has approved the plan of a military strike on Iran, the American media reports. It may be applied to these weekends. The main goal of the Iranian nuclear facility is Fordow, which is located at a serious depth. Meanwhile, Trump continues to insist on the need to capitulate Iran. Israel bombed a plant for the production of centrifuges and many military facilities. Tehran continues chaotic strikes by rockets on Israel. They managed to strike a hospital in the city of Beersheba. According to the President of the United States, Trump also offered his intermediary services to regulate the conflict with Iran. Trump said to Putin that it would be better to deal with the regulation of the war with Ukraine. GURS reports that a member of the occupational administration appointed by the occupiers in 2022, Deputy Mayor Mikhail Gritsai, was liquidated in Berdyansk. Z-blogger Mikhail Polinkov was arrested in Moscow. This happened after his visit to Sarajevo. Polinkov himself is conducting a project to search for missing Russian soldiers. A garbage dump called Ren TV was the head of the news about the arrest. A supporter of Strelkov created a fraudulent project under the guise of searching for SWO fighters. So Polinkov's prospects are not the most joyful. This and much more in today's Fresh Report, which you can support with your like, comments, and subscription to the channel. These actions help to promote the video, especially your subscriptions. Well, you can support the channel financially on Patreon, the link to which is in the description. And by buying in VPN, this is a means to bypass blockages, which allows you to bypass blockages. The state should not decide what to watch, listen, and read. And VPN helps you to have access to all the resources that you consider important for yourself. To YouTube, to Twitter, to Instagram, to blocked media. You can buy it by the link in the description. It is legal in Russia. It is not prohibited to buy and use a VPN. And by buying a VPN, you support the release of new videos on this channel. Well, we move on to what happened in the last 24 hours. The strikes on the object of the Iranian nuclear program do not stop. As part of the efforts to counter the Iranian project of the creation of nuclear weapons, the Israeli VVS, not the BBC, as I said yesterday about the American VVS, but this should have happened sometime in general. The Israeli VVS made a strike on the object used for the production of centrifuge in Tehran, which was designed in order to allow the Iranian regime to increase the scale and speed of refueling uranium for the creation of nuclear weapons, says in the statement of the CIAL. Centrifuge is a machine that enriches uranium, which can be used both for the production of fuel for power plants and for the creation of nuclear weapons. But remember, refueling uranium up to 60% of uranium-235 content, which is carried out by Iran, otherwise as military purposes cannot be explained. Even a minor malfunction of centrifuge, for example, the shutdown of electricity, can lead to the exit of centrifuge from under control. Just recently this happened after a hit on a complex in Natanzia, reported in Nacke. From the statement of the Israeli military, it should be noted that the blow was applied on the object where the centrifuge itself is produced, and not on those that are already in operation. The threat of Iranian shelling of Israel is really weakening. The Minister of Defense of Israel, Israel Katz, said that Israel can now gradually open up in several parts of the country, calling it the last victory over Iran. The authorities are starting a gradual process of opening up the economy in various regions, depending on security considerations. The restrictions were introduced in connection with the Iranian shelling after the Israeli strikes on Iran. Katz also stated that the intensive hostilities against Iran will continue until the threats are eliminated. At the same time, Iran continues to try to strike, but the crowd is becoming less and less numerous. Well, this is a total of 10-20 missiles, however, they sometimes break through the PVO. So, for example, there was a blow to the hospital in Beersheba. According to Western media reports, in particular Radar, hundreds of ballistic missiles were launched across Israel, of which about 80–90% were intercepted. However, despite such high efficiency, some missiles still reached their goals. Despite the statements of the Iranian regime, first of all, these were civilian, non-military objects. Meanwhile, the Iranian authorities do not yet want to capitulate, at least publicly, on the basis of the calls of President Donald Trump to fully capitulate Iran. According to the Iranian state television, the statement of the country's supreme leader, Ayatollah al-Khomeini, was read. He himself did not appear, by the way. The statement looks like this. In it, in particular, it is said that Iran will give a decisive answer if the United States decides to go to military intervention. Any form of military intervention from the United States will undoubtedly face an answer that will cause irreparable damage, the statement says. Also, Khomeini stated that the Iranian people never give up. The wise people who know Iran, their people and their history never speak with this nation in the language of threats because the Iranians are not among those who give up, says the statement of the supreme leader of Iran. In the matter of joining the blow to Iran, the USA keeps strategic uncertainty. Defense Minister Pete Hegseth refused to say whether the USA would directly attack Iran. Democratic Senator Gene Shahin, during a hearing in the Senate committee, asked Hegseth if he considered the possibility of military actions in Iran. "I would not reveal most of what I can say on this platform," said Hegseth, referring to the open, not closed part of the meeting. He added that the United States is now providing maximum protection of its forces in the Middle East. Meanwhile, Trump is considering options that include the use of American military resources to strike Iranian nuclear facilities, ABC News reports with a link to the source. The President of the United States received a number of proposals regarding Iran from his team on national security. Trump himself stated that he cannot say whether the United States will strike Iran. Maybe, maybe not, he said to journalists. At the same time, Times reports that the UK is considering the possibility of military support from Israel if Trump gives an order to strike Iran. It is reported that Prime Minister Stammer will hold a special service meeting today to consider possible scenarios of London's strength interference in the conflict. Apparently, Trump is so immersed in the power of American weapons, even in Israel's hands, that he even stopped to make fun of Vladimir Putin for a while. He made Putin understand that he is not interested in the Kremlin's mediation in negotiations with Iran. Donald Trump said that during a telephone conversation with Vladimir Putin, he did not accept the offer of the Russian leader to act as an intermediary in the settlement of the conflict in the Middle East. "I talked to him yesterday. He actually offered help with the intermediary, and I said, make me a debt, show the intermediary to yourself. Let's first organize the intermediary of Russia. Okay. I said, Vladimir, come on, let's organize the intermediary from the beginning of Russia. You can think about it later," said Trump. Trump probably means a Saturday conversation. At least, such an interpretation of the conversation with Putin is seriously different from the presentation of the Kremlin. As an assistant of the Russian president, Yuri Ushakov said, Iran was at the center of the exchange of opinions during the fifth official phone conversation between Putin and Trump since the return of the last one to the post of president. According to Ushakov, Trump assessed the situation as very disturbing. Russian-American presidents, despite the complicated situation, do not exclude the return to the negotiating track on the Iranian nuclear program, said then. Trump, in his conversation with Putin, noted that the team of American negotiators was ready to resume work with Iranian representatives, said Ushakov. "This is what I told you about. Trump is not a person with a long-term plan. He is very subject to any influence. His obviously limitless position around the world of issues is changing against the background of testosterone. Well, that is, you won't believe it, but in this situation I really believe Putin and Ushakov that Trump said in that conversation that yes, mediation is very cool. Thank you very much, Vladimir. Thank you very much, Vladimir," and now he's kind of in the air as it happens with Trump. Because, well, really, you know, when they often say that women cannot be controlled by the state, because there they say, here, their emotional background changes during the PMS and all that. I always look at this argument quite strangely, because, well, men, including, are subject to a very strong emotional surge, and it is obvious that a large testosterone approach of Donald Trump is unfolding in front of us, not to mention that Trump, in principle, is a moron. Therefore, it seems to me that to choose according to the gender principle of the head of state, or deny the possibility of any gender to be the head of state, is a bullshit. The speech about specific personalities, well, worse than Trump, is probably quite problematic to imagine. If America really starts a war between Israel and Iran and everything ends successfully and quickly, Trump can seriously change his approach to international politics, including a little of my calculation, refusing from the stupid and useless image of an intermediary to a more classical for the United States principle of peace through force. This, of course, can also affect the Ukrainian track. In general, if we were talking about a consecutive and rational actor, I would have no doubt that the United States will start a war between Israel and Iran and will strike on nuclear objects, forcing Iran to surrender. But since we're talking about Trump, everything can change absolutely at any moment. However, Democrats help a lot here. They almost stood against the United States joining the bombing. That is why I have no favorites in the US policy. Some are against Ukraine and we are Republicans. Others are against Israel. But the fact that Democrats are against America joining the war gives Trump the right decision to help Israel with Iran, which is recorded as one of the goals of the state of Iran. which sponsors terrorism all over the world and its proxies in the form of Hamas and Hezbollah. Therefore, yes, of course, Iran should not have nuclear weapons, and in general, Iran should refuse its terrorist policy because, unfortunately, under the rule of the Etol, Iran has become a large terrorist state. As for the insiders, according to specific plans, they are being harassed by Western media. But again, it is necessary to remember that, as a rule, such insiders are the result of a journalist's conversation with a specific official, who can either deliberately or accidentally disinformation the media. Therefore, I do not really like all these links to sources. However, this is what is written in the American media. Trump approved the attack plan on Iran. The United States is preparing for a blow. Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal write that Washington is preparing infrastructure for direct interference in the conflict with Iran. Perhaps this will happen on these weekends. Although some American officials say that the situation is still developing and can change, Trump wants to see whether Iran will refuse his nuclear program. One of the possible goals of the United States is the Iranian object to enrich the uranium of Ford, well protected and hidden deep in the rock. According to Axios, Trump doubts whether the United States will be able to destroy it. He wants to make sure that such an attack is really necessary and will not drag the United States into a long war in the Middle East. And most importantly, it will really destroy the Iranian nuclear program. What is the matter here, and where does Trump have doubts? The fact is that you probably noticed in recent days that all analysts write that the Ford object can only destroy special bombs that only the American B-2 can carry. In fact, this is a very theoretical statement. Firstly, because these bombs have never been used in combat. We are talking about MOPS, which means the declared depth of impact is 60 meters. And in fact, these anti-bunker bombs were created to hit objects at the maximum depth. The problem is that the depth of the Ford object is 80-90 meters. So there is no guarantee that it will be possible to destroy it even with this bomb, at least from the first time. What are the alternatives? Firstly, any underground object is provided with an underground infrastructure. Of course, the plans of construction would be very useful in Australia. It is remarkable that recently, by the way, Russia has just lost the plans of nuclear arsenals and opportunities. This is to the question of how sensitive and important the information of this kind is, and the information that has leaked in the case I told you about. Unfortunately, such information did not leak in Iran. Well, secondly, what I would not like very much is the landing of a special team, something similar to the American operation to eliminate bin Laden. However, it will be 1,000 times more difficult. That is, it is necessary to completely isolate the area of the air operation, then throw Israeli soldiers on the object, then blind these soldiers to enter the object, where there may be a huge number of Iranian soldiers. Where are they supposed to be? Otherwise, they are not visible at all. Then install a lot of explosives, then leave the object and evacuate on helicopters. By description, you understand that all this looks more like a movie or a game and is not at all possible. Recently, we have seen a lot of cinematographic operations. Such a plan is absolutely exactly considered by the Israeli leadership. And this, I say, is not with a reference to some insides. It's just obvious. Well, that is, because if the United States does not give its deep bombs, then how do they not give? The United States cannot just give these deep bombs because only B-2 can carry them, which, of course, Israel does not have and which Americans do not give to anyone. These are strategic American bombers, these stealths. Therefore, this implies only the direct participation of the United States in this operation. If this does not happen, then the problem of Ford will not go anywhere. Because the basic scenario of Israel in order to destroy the Iranian opportunity to exist as a state, thereby forcing Iran to capitulate or achieve a regime change. But of course, the problem of the Ford object still does not go anywhere. Therefore, yes, I am sure they are considering an underground operation. Yes, because this is, as it were, not the entry of the Israeli troops into the territory of Iran, but full-scale military units, but a specific landing of a conditional special forces, which can carry out all this. I would very much like this scenario. It is very risky, very dangerous, very difficult to implement. But in any case, let's look at what will happen in the future. Iran is very bad. How are they going to get out of this without taking the conditions that are offered to them? The question is open, but I hope that in any case, first of all, it will not last too long. And secondly, of course, it will lead to, well, in fact, all the problems of the Middle East that exist for 2025. This is exclusively Iran, a little Qatar, but in the mass of it's Iran. And as a solution to the problem of Iran, that is, the Ayatollah regime, at least in the declared goals, will solve the problem of the Middle East, in principle, in general. Therefore, I really want Israel and other states of the Middle East, including including the Arab countries to which all this did not rely, which are already ready to economically interact with Israel. Sign the Abrahamic agreements and so on, they also did not rely on all this at all. This is the strategy of Iran, just to be the main terrorist force in the world. Therefore, we will hope that all this will be completed as soon as possible and without victims among civilians, including in Iran. Because, again, 90 million people live in Iran. Iran is in a very political situation in which many are dissatisfied with their leadership. But the death of a civilian is always a tragedy, no matter what country it comes from. And of course, the death of a citizen of Israel is already there. And we must not forget that no matter how successful this or that military operation is, the war is still a war. People die on it, and therefore, every time there is joy, I don't know, with some success, we must not forget that it is still the price of human lives. And unfortunately, dozens and hundreds of those who died in Israel are already wounded. At the same time, of course, we must not forget, we are not Trump, that this war in Ukraine does not stop. Russia continues to attack in many directions and, of course, uses the fact that world attention is focused on the Middle East, on the war between Israel and Iran. And therefore, the attention that is paid to the Ukrainian conflict, to the Ukrainian army, to the help of the Ukrainian army, is now greatly reduced. Therefore, it is necessary to support it even more. And we continue to select the equipment for the fortification of the 53rd Ministry of the Russian Federation's Engineering Supply Group. Let me remind you of their address. We are an engineering supply group of the 53rd Separate Mechanized Brigade of the Russian Federation. We are building a line of defense of our state in the Donetsk direction. Unfortunately, we have to lose the equipment. We need self-sufficiency for the organization of effective work. Let's call on YouTube and Telegram channels, Mike Nacke and Mike Nacke personally with a request to help collect money for the Samosket. Thank you very much. Glory to Ukraine, death to Ukraine. Here is the QR code for Monobank. In the description there is a link to the Monobank PayPal USDT TRC20. The collection is going very well. Thank you very much. We have already closed most of it. There is not so much left. Nevertheless, it would be great to finish the collection today. There is still something like 300,000 hryvnia to finish. In general, the collection was 1,300,000 hryvnia. Therefore, thank you very much to everyone who participates. This is an incredible help. You literally help save the lives of Ukrainian defenders and those they defend. Ukraine does not plan to mention in the final communiqué the NATO summit in Nacke, reports Radio Liberty with a reference to the diplomats participating in the preparation of the document. At the same time, Russia will again be called a long-term threat. Also, allies are obliged to increase the level of defense spending up to 5% of GDP by the end of 2032. However, this obligation can be revised by 2029. By this time, the current presidential term of Trump, which stands for the corresponding level of defense spending, will end. It is noted that the communiqué will be much shorter than usual and will fit on one page. In the meantime, the meeting of Zelensky and Trump may not take place again due to the war with Iran. Kiev is not sure if Zelensky should attend the NATO summit in Gaga next week, as there are no guarantees that Trump will appear there, reports Guardian with a reference to the source. Publication notes that Ukrainian diplomats were disappointed that Trump refused to consider Ukraine a priority after Zelensky flew 8,000 kilometers to get to the G7 summit in Canada, where, as expected, the negotiations of the two presidents will take place. Ukraine is constantly becoming a victim of the events and carelessness of Trump. Putin knows this, and maybe that's why last night such a massive attack was made on Ukraine, said one of the Ukrainian interlocutors of the publication. Here I can only be happy that this was done within the framework of, how to say, within the framework of a conversation with the publication, and not publicly, because, again, despite the fact that it is incredibly unfair that Ukraine has left the attention of the United States and information agencies around the world, despite this, it is necessary to accept the reality in which Donald Trump cannot fit two things in parallel in his head. So when he is now asked questions about Ukraine, he is only angry and irritated because his head is completely occupied by the Middle East. The NATO summit will take place in Hague on June 24-25. Washington has previously confirmed the intention of Trump to come there, but yesterday the State Department did not exclude that the President of the United States can miss the summit for the war between Israel and Iran. Fortunately, not all allies of the component do not care about Ukraine. Canada announced a new package of military aid to Ukraine for the amount of $2 billion of Canadian dollars. This is about $1.5 billion of the United States. On June 17, at the G7 summit in the Canadian Canaan, former President of Ukraine Ukraine Vladimir Zelensky held a meeting with Prime Minister of Canada Mark Carney. During the meeting, Carney announced the introduction of sanctions against a number of Russian people from more than 40 companies in the RF and other countries that help bypass sanctions, as well as against more than 200 courts of the Russian Shadow Fleet. Also, the Prime Minister announced a new package of military aid to Ukraine: drones, helicopters, ammunition. Some of these funds will be spent on the development of domestic defense production in Ukraine, which is particularly good. He emphasized that military support will be formed in accordance with the actual needs of the Ukrainian army. The White House, in the meantime, continues to do everything to ensure that it does not offend Putin, while deepening the crisis in relations with its allies. At the summit of the Big Seven in Canada, it was not accepted as planned the declaration of war in Ukraine, because the U.S. delegation wanted to soften the text of the accusations against Russia. This is reported by the World Agency and other media. The representative of the Government of Canada on the terms of anonymity told journalists that Canada, as the host of the summit, decided to cancel the signing of the declaration of war in Ukraine. Because the U.S. wanted to make it more, it would be unfair in relation to Ukraine, whose President Zelensky. Newsday flew to the summit. Americans did not want to see in the text some sharp statements against Russia, because they feared that it would interfere with their negotiations with this country. Trump, who is concerned about the end of the war, gives the words of this official face to the Canadian TV company CBC. Part of the text of the statement agreed by the other 6 countries, the Prime Minister of Canada Mark Carney will include his own statement as a result of the summit, with which he will speak a little later. The G7 summit took place on June 16-17 in the Canadian Kananaskis. Well, the most probably curious news, of course, again about the Americans and their peaceful initiatives. Trump's ambassador to Ukraine, Nikita Kellogg, goes to Lukashenko to talk about the negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, says Reiter. According to 2 sources, the exact date is not yet known. At the same time, Kellogg, in private talks, stated that he considers this trip a potential step towards the beginning of peaceful negotiations on the end of the war between Russia and Ukraine. Reiter notes such diplomatic visits require subtle negotiations and can be changed or cancelled at the last minute. In the event of the implementation of the visit, Kellogg will become the highest representative of the United States, which will visit Belarus in recent years. Personally, I believe that nothing will come out of this, except for the legitimization of the Lukashenko regime. Although in Moscow they can be offended if in Minsk they take Kellogg, who was previously removed from negotiations with Russia due to his excessive pro-Ukrainian position, as they said. Well, in general, I don't see anything harmful from this visit either. Let Russia be paranoid and let Vladimir Putin personally be paranoid that Lukashenko is conducting some kind of separate negotiations with America and the West. Lukashenko is known for his love to sit on all chairs at once. In the project Cyberbarashno, they talked about the results of one of the recent strikes on the Russian object of the military-industrial complex. As a result of the strike on June 8 at the Azot company in Novosibirsk, the Tula region was probably affected by the installation of the ammiac synthesis and primary cooling, researchers wrote, bringing the corresponding satellite images. To make it clear why this ammiac is one of the key components for the production of explosives, they write, this plant produces more than 1 million tons of ammiac and 1.4 million tons of ammiac 4,000 liters annually, explained in Cyberbarashno. Yuri reported on the elimination of another collaborator on the occupied territory. On June 18, 1925, during the occupation of Berdyansk and Zaporozhye oblasts, a collaborator, a state traitor, and a military criminal, Garitsy Mikhail Pavlovich, was shot. Garitsy, born in the Poltava region, lived in Berdyansk and headed the Socialist Party of Ukraine. After the occupation of the city in 1922, he voluntarily cooperated with the Russian occupiers and received a position in the occupational administration. He was the so-called acting mayor of the city and at the same time deputy to the question of infrastructure of the ZHKH and the fuel and energy complex. In fact, he was stealing state property in the occupied Berdyansk in the interests of the Russians. Participated in military crimes, terrorized the population of the occupied city, gave out to the Russians pro-Ukrainian citizens, participated in the organization of torture in the territory of Berdyansk. It was immediately notified about suspicions in the framework of criminal production of the first 422 year, according to Part 2 of Article 111 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, state fraud. The Guru of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine reminds that for every crime committed against the Ukrainian people, there will be a fair payment, they promised to the department. It remains only to wish him good luck, and those who went to serve the occupants a pleasant walk on a scooter. Yesterday and the day before yesterday in Kiev, attempts were made to evict people from the rubble after the attack on the night of June 17. The evening of June 17, the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine reported that in the Solomensky district of Kiev, where a section of a multi-story building collapsed from the hit of a rocket, a search and rescue operation was completed more than 39 hours later, and the construction was continued. 23 dead bodies were taken to this location from under the rubble. In total, 28 people were killed in the capital on June 17 as a result of a Russian shelling. More than 140 were wounded. Shack strikes may become even more massive and deadly in the near future, the Ukrainian specialist in the field of drones, Sergei Flash by Skresnov warns. Here's what he writes: as you know, I'm optimistic and I'm worried only in extreme cases. Russia will blow up the whole country with shots. They have scaled the production and continue to scale. If we don't start acting right now, our infrastructure, production, and defense structures are over. The main focus should be on the mass release of drone interceptors and military training throughout the country. We don't have time for them. This is what Sergei Sternenko says literally every day. The expansion of the SHOD production is confirmed by satellite data, they say on the Dnipro Garbuz channel. On the new satellite images of the Albueg OS, new construction works can be seen. The author of the channel writes that the total area is more than 1.5 square kilometers or 139 hectares. Most of the new buildings are hostile for new factory workers. Russians are increasing the pace of the SHOD production and are not going to stop, he states in the channel. The same problem is also told by volunteer Sergei Sternenko, already mentioned, and this is what he writes. What did the enemy do to the SHOD? Yes, he introduced some innovations. Yes, he began to connect them to our private networks, and with this you need to fight the entire complex of the world. But the main thing that the enemy did was increase production, change the tactics of application, and both the first and the second were more than predictable and expected. But were we ready for these obvious steps? Absolutely not. Why? Asks Sternenko, because the military system was and remains very untangible, resists innovation, and does not set a goal to work on a warning. I will give only one example. Since the 23rd year, I have been telling everyone who could reach out about the need for drone air defense, including the former command of the Air Force, with which I never managed to establish a contact. Through intermediaries, I was assured that everything would be done, people would be sent to school, VOS would be prepared, the operators would not be given to the infantry. What happened in practice, I know. The command of the land forces at that time quite actively supported innovation, although I did not have direct communication with them either. But this mainly concerned the work near the line of contact, where the sheiks do not appear often. What's next? Now the state has decided to look for a solution. It will be, but for the time being we will pay with the lives of our people, and then the enemy will change the means, tactics again, and we will not be ready again. And so, in a circle, because the reaction when it is already burning is insufficient, we will either change or die. Complex army reform, the issue of our survival, is Sternenko. Now let's move on to the events directly on the line of contact. In the Sumy direction, Deep State notes the promotion of the Russian armed forces in the region of Unikovka, confirming that, unfortunately, the Russian offensive on Sumy has not been completely stopped yet, although it is seriously slowed down. But there is good news from this direction. In the course of the recent counterattack by Andreevka on Sumy, the fighters of the 1st Assault Battalion Black Swan of the 225th Separate Assault Regiment, as they say, have beaten a rather fat occupant, it is said on the social networks of the unit. Commander of the battalion of the 30th Motor Rifle Regiment of the Russian Federation was eliminated. At Andreevka, the assault group of the 1st Assault Battalion, Black Swan, of the 225th Separate Assault Regiment went to the command post of the battalion of the 30th Motor Rifle Regiment of the Army of the Russian Federation. The commander of the battalion, Major Andriy Yartsev, was inside. During the assault, he was eliminated, reports Black Swan. Now let's move to the Pokrovskaya direction. According to the Deep State, the Russians have advanced in the area of Mirnovo to the east of Mirnograd. This is part of Russian actions to capture the agglomeration of Pokrovsk-Mirnograd from the east. The project was separately affected by the battles in the area of Yalonovka at the junction of the Pokrovsko and Tortsko directions, where the Russian armed forces is trying to break through to Konstantinovka. 36th Separate Brigade of the Marine Corps is conducting heavy battles for Yalonovka. In the footage published by the brigade, you can see the defeat of the Russian infantry in it, which is located in the northern town of Mirnograd. In addition to infantry groups, the enemy uses motorcycle vehicles. An interesting point on the video already lost but covered with concrete, the fortifications are noted in the Deep State. On the same direction, on June 17, the most rare large-scale mechanized assault took place. As usual, unsuccessful, Ukrainian military say. For example, Stanislav Bunyatov, who writes the following: the Russian in the Konstantinovsky direction was very successful in Storm. They were engaged in BBM, quad bicycles, and BMP. One BMP just stuck in the anti-tank mine. Two began to fuss at the mine and were destroyed like steel equipment. In general, the guys reacted very quickly and did not give the enemy a single chance to advance. But this is how the reflection of this attack is told by a colleague of Bunyatov, the author of the Telegram channel officer. About 14 units of equipment yesterday tried to break through the mechanized storm in the Konstantinovsky direction. But not all of them were able to reach the line of combat due to the excellent work of the infantry, artillery, and BPA units of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. The parade was closed by Russian quad bicycles. Everyone was flying forward, which probably meant going to Konstantinovsky, briefly, but it ended in a significant way. Soon there were shots of the storm, which was geolocized by the Infectum channel. The Mangusta channel publishes shots of a successful reflection of yesterday's unmechanized attack on the Konstantinovsky direction. Yesterday, at least 24 pieces of heavy armored vehicles were involved in the attack, most of which were destroyed, estimates Infactum. Sergei Sternenko also tells about the reflection of the same assault. Yesterday, that is, June 17, the Russians suddenly went to the columns of the unmechanized assault on the Konstantinovsky direction and burned down. One of the BMPs fell into the ravine. The Phoenix Border Squad participated in the assault and, with the help of your drones, burned on several units of equipment, 3 BMPs, 2 tanks and a BTR. Sternenko. Unmechanized assaults will periodically occur in all directions, says Stanislav Bunyatov. The enemy regularly moves there where he has already succeeded once and where it does not meet the resistance of the critical for his troops. At present, head-on assaults with great losses are taking place mainly in those areas where the Russians strive to either get a tactical advantage for the further development of offensive actions, or to go to the desired boundary to carry out demoralizing propaganda campaigns. The enemy clearly understands where and why he puts a lot of meat, since his methods are justified by the achieved goals. Well, as far as Russian losses are justified by the achieved goals, we will talk separately in the near future, and now we will move on. The Turkish direction, let's talk a little about it. In the Turkish direction, in the deep state, the Russian forces were noted to move north from Zari. Here, the Russians also intend to go to Konstantinovka, slowly approaching Yablanovka from the south. Despite the reflection of large assaults, it is not yet possible to completely stop the Russian offensive in this area. South Donetsk direction, what is happening there? There, Russians continue to move towards the Dnepropetrovsk region, in particular in the Kamara region, says the author of the Telegram channel officer. The situation in the Kamara region, to put it mildly, is not very good, he reports. The enemy is moving both in the settlement itself and in the neighboring areas. While all attention was focused on Sumchina, we have another zone where the enemy is actively developing its success, the officer resumes. At the same time, not all the successes in the Russian armed forces in this direction correspond to the actuality, even those that are allegedly confirmed by the personnel of the objective control. In the Z community, they continue to discuss the practice of flags. After a week after the publication of the personnel with the flag from Alexeyevka, it turned out that the Ukrainian forces are still present in the village as a result of the commodity. Flags is one thing, the cleaning of the settlement and the actual containment in it is another thing, writes the Z channel Yasynovtaya Donbass on the line of fire. Trouble in the uncontrolledness of the reports, the impunity to take them into credit, is that there are extremely few high officials on the real front, or there are no high officials at all. And from Rostov you will not see where the population of the punk really cleaned up, and where the flag was stuck for proof. According to the script, during the times of Besler Khodorkovsky, there were no slugs. According to the script, Filagov is very risky to get into a car for non-smokers after the publication data. This is meant by the author Svyatoslav Golikov, who, in fact, raised the topic with slugs in Alexeyevka. And it is thought that not for the sake of hype and indifference, he raised this issue in the public field. Apparently, episodic facts have acquired an outline of ordinary, i.e. real problems, in the dry remnant of which are irreversible losses. People who, with reasonable use, could stay alive, work for victory, and further bring the benefit of the motherland, includes the Z channel. Intensity of Russian offensive actions is not weakened. According to the infographic, the resources near the mountain, on the basis of the general headquarters in the Soviet Union, the number of Russian assault operations in a week from June 9 to June 15 increased by 16% compared to a week before that, reaching 193 attacks per day. This is light. It is interesting that this happened mostly due to the activation of the three-step directions of the offensive of the southern Donetsk, Toretsky, and Sumsk, where the growth of the number of assaults was 28 to 43%, while the number of attacks on the main Pokrovsky direction was slightly reduced by 9%, although more than a quarter of the total number of assault actions is still registered there. An alarming video is published in Z channels, and now Russian FV drones are able to fly to the northern outskirts of Kharkov, even without an optical fiber. This did not happen due to the movement in the direction of the city. The front in the north of the region is practically static, but due to the development of unmanned technologies, which are also not in place in the Russian army. Of course, there are achievements of Ukrainian aircraft. In the 413th Battalion, the forces of the unmanned systems raid told about the defeat of the Russian RLS. And why is everyone silent about the fact that we hit the RLS Yastry by V? Right, because we haven't shown it yet, but the time has come. Here are the frames, no infographics, no memes, real results of work. $250 million, this is not just the cost of the equipment, this is the price of the blindness of the enemy and our joy. The raid battalion does not work for the sake of glory, but for the sake of the effect. But since such a topic has been sent, tell everyone, because hitting the Yastry is not just beautiful, it is strategically important. And you spread are called to the channel of the unit. I show? New fascinating episode of Evacuation in Moscow is detained by the author of the Telegram channel, Soltsaya Pravda Military Corps Mikhail Polankov. He was detained on the morning of June 18 by the military police. According to his lawyer, Mikhail was delivered to the Military Investigation Department SKR on Spartakovskaya Street. The reason for the detention is not yet clear. Mikhail Polankov is the deputy chairman of the Russian movement Strelkov and a member of the CIC of the political party KPRS, Russian Spring. Polankov himself suggested that he was detained for a video with Vladimir Solovyev, where he recalls the promise to go to defend Israel. The video was published on the channel of Polankov, and already the following post by the Twin Corps reported about his detention. Ivrea has never hidden this. In 2004, when there was such a tension, I gave an interview to this youthful Jewish newspaper. I said that if there was a war in Israel, like in Ivrea, I would go there to defend my people. Now it will be published in Russian media, in slums, garbage cans, Ren TV in particular, for allegedly organizing a fraudulent scheme. It is about his project in search of missing people. At the same time, other channels say that this is due to the fact that he is a 500. The fact that he is a 500, I personally know for a long time. Attempts of the military police have already been made about 1.5 years ago to detain him, but somehow they agreed and apparently they allowed him to continue working. But apparently the intelligence ended. Judging by the fact that there are no official messages from the investigation, including the committee, this may be his last Chinese warning, and maybe nothing will save him and he will just be put in the next room with an arrow. We will see. But of course, we will watch the reaction of the Z channels to what is happening. Of course, they are already preparing, they are already set on the stove, the water has already boiled, the dumplings are thrown. So of course, we will watch the reaction of the Z channels when one of them was accepted once again. Scenes of torture of Russian military personnel appear regularly. This time on the video you can see how a man was put in a booth on a chain and thrown food into it. During the mockery he is threatened with sentencing. This is actually about those whom the authorities call heroes, comments the channel Mobilization of the News. This video is once again about torture that the Russians apply to the Russians. It is not surprising that the Russian army is threatened with sentencing, because most often this is a ticket to one end, in particular because of the state of Russian tactical medicine and evacuation. Scenarios on this topic from Russian social networks are published by the channel Parapax, accompanying them with such comments. In the Russian army, on the 4th year of the war, the level of training for takmits has dropped to the times of the First World War. They burn some bulls with a cart that they run away when they arrive. Such training is usually carried out in 2 or 3 days. Another story about the fact that not only the veterans of the SSO themselves, but their relatives are not needed in the Rostov region. The widow of the former wife of the deceased soldier is forced to return the previously received payments. The widow of the former wife of the deceased soldier told her husband that 2 years after his death, the Ministry of Defense asked the widow for compensation for the insurance payments of the children. The soldier died in 1923. He had 4 children from different marriages. Each child had a number of payments. Now the women were informed that the first woman's salary was overpaid to 700,000 rubles, the second to 1.4 million rubles. Both were obliged to return these amounts, allegedly due to an unaccounted child. Although, according to the women, all the information about the children was temporarily given to the Ministry of Defense and the military command. Many times the Ministry of Defense and the military command, all this was given temporarily. As a matter of fact, we are just being driven into debt. Both women spent the money they received on housing. All the actions took place with the help of the health authorities. Also, the woman said that the widow lost her job and was fired after the company found out about the death of her husband at the SVO. According to her, the company belongs to a construction worker who has a negative attitude towards military action. On the same day, another employee, also a widow, who lost her husband at the front, was fired. Women applied for legal aid to the Foundation of Defenders of the Fatherland, however, they have not yet received the result. One of them is a single mother, the other is raising 3 children. The woman clarified that her salary is 26,000 rubles and she has no opportunity to return the money. I ask for help, I ask for justice, because this is help to children, to SVOs. SVOs are everywhere, we are counting on you, we will help you, but in fact it turns out the other way around. So if you think that by going to the front you will provide for your family, this is not the case. The state does not care about you, your children, your wives, the current and former. Russia does not care at all about the lives of Russian citizens. In the Leningrad region, they decided to dismantle the monument to a member of the Great Patriotic War for the sake of a memorial dedicated to the war in Ukraine. In the rural settlement of Usluga in the Leningrad region, local authorities plan to replace the memorial plate dedicated to the captain of the submarine, who died in the year of the Great Patriotic War, with a monument to a member of the war in Ukraine. This is said in the tender for the repair of the memorial. In the documents of the project, it is said that the dismantling of the monument to the captain of the first rank, Ismail Zaydulin, with a subsequent transfer to a new place, where exactly and when it is planned to be brought, is not specified. The memorial plate in which Saydelin is installed on the brotherly burial in the quarter of Karakol, near the large monument to the participants of the Great Patriotic War on the brotherly burial. Instead of this plate, the authorities intend to install 6 other with the names of those who died in the war with Ukraine, and next to the memorial arch with a bell and cranes. The authorities estimate the project to be worth almost 13 million rubles. The monument to Ismail Yüzeyculin was installed in 1919. At the beginning of the Great Patriotic War, the captain commanded a submarine to protect the 423rd Pacific Fleet, and in the years of the Great Patriotic War, he fought on boats. After returning from the Krasnoyarsk region, he threatens to disband his wife. The participant of the full-scale military invasion in Ukraine is 32-year-old Roman Davidov, who will also probably, at one time, get some kind of a platoon that can replace the platoon of real participants in the defensive wars of the Great Patriotic War. The 32-year-old Roman Davidov came on vacation for a month to the Obansky district on vacation. As Austria became known, in the course of that conflict, he began to threaten his wife with indignation and tried to keep her at home forcibly when she tried to leave the apartment. At the moment, I managed to leave and hide, but he promises to find me soon, kill everyone and burn, said Anna Austria. According to her, Davidov has not yet managed to get to her only because his car broke down. The police say that so far he has not done anything. They cannot do anything either. He used to behave inappropriately, but I never resisted and he quickly calmed down. And now he decided to destroy me because I started to defend myself, said Austria Anna. When they kill, then I come. Here is the answer from the Russian police. But such people, according to Vladimir Putin, are the new elite of Russia. Do not have anything in common with Russian military. Stay away from them. Do not be in one room. These people are dangerous for you. It was Michael Nacke, and see you soon. All the best. Bye.